and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today, we'll be discussing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 10th January 2019. The articles to be discussed today are reflected on your screen and the timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So let's start. And is stating that the Constitutional Amendment Bill, which provides for 10% quota for the poor, has been passed by the Parliament. That is, it has been passed by both the houses of the Parliament, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. The 124th Constitutional Amendment Bill of 2018 provides for reservation for the economically weaker section of a society in the general category. That is, it seeks to provide 10% quota for those economically weaker sections of the people who are not covered by any of the existing reservation schemes. The details of the decision by the government to provide this reservation has been discussed thoroughly in the DNS of 8th January 2018, and in today's discussion we would rather be focusing on the provisions of this 124th Constitutional Amendment Bill of 2018. But before we go and talk about the provisions, we first need to understand the background of the situation, that is from where this 10% reservation for the economically weaker section actually arose. As far as the background of this situation is concerned, the decision to provide 10% reservation for the economically weaker section was based on the recommendation given by the Second Backward Class Commission, popularly known as the Mandal Commission, which was constituted in the year 1979. As an additional information, you should remember that the first Backward Class Commission, which was constituted in the year 1953. Now, in the 1990, the then government issued an office memorandum according to which it provided 27% reservation for the socially and educationally backward classes of people. After this decision of the government, there were widespread agitation and protest all across the country, and therefore, in a move to pacify people, in 1991, a second office of memorandum was issued. According to this second office memorandum did retain 27% of reservation for the socially and educationally backward classes, but in addition to that, it added another provision of reservation, that is, it provided for 10% reservation for the economically weaker section of the society. After these two office memorandums, a lot of PILs and cases were filed in the Supreme Court, and finally, the decision regarding the reservation culminated in the decision of Indira Sahani versus the Union of India in the year 1992. We will not go into the details of this Indira Sahani case, but from the perspective of our discussion, you should know that this case upheld the 27% reservation for the socially and educationally backward class, but categorically stated that such kind of reservation will not be provided for the creamy layer amongst this SEBC. Second, it struck down the provision for 10% reservation for the economically weaker section of the society. The reason it cited was that poverty alone cannot be the sole criteria to judge if a person should be given reservation or not. In order to have reservation, in addition to poverty, there is a requirement that there should be social backwardness as well. And since this 10% reservation was rather meant for the people who were poor but belonged to the upper caste, the Indira Sahani judgment said that the people belonging to the upper caste and class do not witness any kind of social backwardness. Hence, their poverty or the economic backwardness is not a good enough reason to provide them reservation. Thirdly, the judgment also put a 50% cap on the entire reservation which has to be provided in the country. Now, the aim of the 124th Constitutional Amendment Bill is to bring 10% reservation for the economically weaker section of the society in the general category. Further, this reservation will be provided in educational institutions, including the private institutions, as well as in matters of jobs and appointments. The bill mentions that the central government will notify such economically weaker sections of the citizen based on the family income as well as other indicators of economic disadvantage. Now, the bill in its current form does not specifically mention what these indicators would be, but the 3-4 parameters which the government has been mentioning in the last 2 days are firstly that the family income should be less than 8 lakh a year, along with other parameters like the size of the agricultural land, the size of the house they own or the plot they own, etc. All these parameters were discussed by Naved sir in the DNS dated 8th January 2019. Now, the reason this bill is a constitutional amendment bill is because it wants to add a clause 6 to Article 15 and Article 16, which are fundamental rights in our Constitution. The Article 15 of the Indian Constitution prohibits discrimination against any citizen on the grounds of race, religion, caste, sex, or place of birth alone. But Article 15 Clause 4 further states that the government can make any kind of special provision for the advancement of any socially or educationally backward class or the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribe. Hence, under Article 15 Clause 4, the government does has the power to make any kind of special provision for both the socially and educationally backward class as well as the ST and the SC. Please remember that the article uses the word or. Hence, the scope of Article 15 is not just limited to socially and educationally backward class, but also extends to the SC and the STs. But now, this 124th Constitutional Amendment wants to add a new subclause to Article 15, that is subclause 6, which says that the state can make special provision for the economically weaker section of the society relating to their admission in educational institutions, including the private institutions, whether they are aided or not aided by the government. But such kind of reservation in educational institutions will not be applicable for the minority institutions. Hence, here we need to remember that this reservation in educational institution is also applicable to the private institutions, whether they are aided or not aided by the government. And secondly, such provision of reservation is not applicable for the minority institutions. Lastly, the subclause 6 of this Article 15 will categorically provide that this reservation of 10% for the economically weaker section of the society is in addition to the existing provisions of reservation given under the Constitution or under any law in force at the time being. Now coming to Article 16, Article 16 talks about equality of opportunity in matters related to public employment, and it categorically states that no citizen shall be discriminated in the matters of employment in the government office, that is in the matters of public employment, on the basis of religion, race, caste, sex, descent or place of birth, residence, etc. Further, Clause 4 of Article 16 says that the state can make any provision for reservation for any kind of backward class of citizen, provided that in the opinion of the state, this backward class has not been adequately represented in the services under that state. Hence, what Article 16 Clause 4 is stating, that if the government feels that a certain backward class has not been adequately represented in any of the services, then the state can make provision for reservation of such backward class of citizens. The Constitutional 124th Amendment Bill wants to add a new subclause, that is Clause 6 to Article 16, which provides for reservation in public employment for the economically weaker sections of the citizens. Further, the article again categorically mentions that this reservation would be in addition to the existing provisions of reservation given to other classes and castes. Hence, what you majorly need to remember is that this Constitutional Amendment Bill will add Article 15 Clause 6 and Article 16 Clause 6 to the Constitution of India, and therefore it intends to amend the fundamental rights provided under Part 3 of our Indian Constitution. Now that we have discussed the provision of the 124th Constitutional Amendment Bill, let us look at some of the challenges which can be posed against this bill in the future. Now, though the government has decided to amend Article 15 and Article 16 to facilitate providing 10% reservation for the economically weaker section, but there is a doubt if such an amendment would pass the judicial scrutiny. The first ground would be the criteria of backwardness. The reason is the Constitution of India provides reservation only for the backward class of citizen. That is to say, presently the Constitution only mentions giving reservation to the backward class of citizen. The reason for this is because it is felt that these backward class of citizens have suffered for a very long time a lot of discrimination, especially in the areas of education and employment. But the current reservation is aimed for the people of economically weaker section who come under the general category. Hence, the first question which arises is that whether these people of general category who are being given this 10% reservation only on the basis of their poverty, are these people even backward in the sense that have they even been discriminated or been excluded from opportunities in education and employment since ancient times? Therefore, a larger question again comes into play is that whether reservation can be given only on the criteria of economic backwardness, or is it necessary that to provide reservation, a class or a section of society has to be socially backward and should have been discriminated against. The second challenge could be that this amendment violates the basic structure of the Constitution. In previous judgments of the Supreme Court, especially with relation to reservation, the judiciary has time and again held that fundamental right to equality is one of the core pillars of democracy in our country. So though, at one hand, it is important to provide people who are backward or downtrodden with certain means and support so that they can be assimilated into the mainstream of the society, but at the same time, the government cannot provide such large amount of reservation that the general category also becomes a minority and suffer due to lack of inequality. Therefore, since this amendment will raise the total percentage of reservation provided in our country to 60%, it really puts in question the equality which has been guaranteed to every citizen of our country. And this concept of equality is also reflected in the decision of the Indira Sahni case where it had put 50% cap on reservation. Therefore, the third challenge which this amendment would face is that it would go against the judgment which was given under the Indira Sahni case. Under the Indira Sahni case, the court had again stated that there should be a 50% cap on reservation and only in exceptional cases this 50% cap should be breached. Now again, since this 10% reservation to the economically weaker section does not constitute an exceptional situation, this amendment is liable for judicial scrutiny. Another hurdle for this amendment would be that Article 16 clearly says that reservation in public appointment will be provided if there is no adequate representation to that class or caste of citizen. Therefore, in the case of reservation, a specific criteria of inadequate representation is required. The scheduled caste, the scheduled tribes, as well as the socially and educationally backward class have been inadequately represented in the past, therefore they have been provided with reservation. But the same cannot be said for this socially advanced class of citizen who shall be getting reservation under this bill. Hence, since the general category people already have adequate representation, the government would then need to show quantifiable data so as to prove how these economically weaker sections are not adequately represented in the services currently. Lastly, the criteria which has been selected by the government who would constitute as an economically poor section comes into question due to its appropriateness. There has been a lot of hue and cry amongst a lot of section of society that the current criteria to decide the poorness of a class of citizen is not appropriate and needs to be revisited. Hence, this criteria by the government again can be brought into question. Now, we have noticed that a lot of you in the previous videos have again and again asked whether the consent of states are required in this constitutional amendment or not. There has been a constant debate going on with respect to state ratification for this constitutional amendment bill. Now, because of lack of clarity on the nature of this amendment as well as its impact on the state, it was considered and was quoted by various newspapers in the last 2-3 days that this bill would require state ratification. However, yesterday's debate in Parliament saw the Finance Minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, categorically saying on the floor of the House that there is no need for state ratification for this constitutional amendment bill. So as far as the current situation regarding the consent of the state is concerned, if we are to go by what has been said by the Finance Minister in the House, then the consent of states is not required for the present bill. And since the bill has been passed by both the Houses of the Parliament, the only thing which is awaiting now is the assent of the President. However, considering the impact of this bill on the fundamental rights and considering the fact that the state governments too would have to bring a lot of changes in their provisions with respect to employment and education, there is a lot of possibility that this bill can be challenged in the Supreme Court on the ground whether the consent of states was required or not. But again, this is a news in transition and we would have to wait to see what exactly would be the outcome. But as of today, the bill does not require the consent of the state to be passed. Based on a question, here is a prelims practice question for you. Please pause the video and solve this. We will discuss the answer after 5 seconds. The first statement, the ambit of the backward class is wider under Article 16 as compared to Article 15 is correct. Article 15 mentions socially and educationally backward class, whereas Article 16 mentions any backward class. Hence, the ambit under Article 16 is much wider. Second, Article 15 prohibits discrimination in matters of public employment. This is incorrect. It's not Article 15 but Article 16 which prohibits discrimination in matters of public employment. Article 15 Article 15 prohibits discrimination on the grounds of race, religion, caste, sex, or place of birth, and talks about making special provisions to provide reservation in educational institutions. Therefore, the right answer is A, one only. With this, we come to an end for this article's discussion. Let's move on to our next news. This news article has been taken from page number 13 and is talking about tokenization of digital transactions. As per the news, the Reserve Bank of India has granted permission in the form of coming out with guidelines for tokenization of debit, credit, as well as prepaid card transactions in India. In order to understand tokenization, we first need to look into the background of this news and understand how transactions usually work in the current scenario. Now, generally what happens is that consumer saves their detail regarding their debit and the credit card with any service provider, an application or a website for smooth and easy transaction. For example, you and me today, if we are purchasing anything from Amazon, we have already saved the details of our card, that is the card number, its expiration date, etc. with that website like the Amazon, eBay, Paytm, etc. So usually this is what all the consumers do. Hence the users save their card details with these service providers for future payments, and the payment is often made by using a PIN code, a OTP or the CVV number of the card. So with most of the websites and applications, we have saved our card details, and when we have to make the payment, we just enter the CVV number of our card and then we receive an OTP, or usually we would put some kind of password which would help for the smooth, easy and fast transaction. But now imagine a scenario in which these service providers, that is these websites or app, if at all they get hacked, then the user's card details can be compromised and data can be stolen. Therefore, if the security of any of these service providers or applications get compromised and they get hacked, even the consumer's security, their data and their safety would be compromised. And this could even lead to large-scale fraud. Hence, in this context, RBI has now allowed tokenization of card payments, which will avoid such frauds and data theft. Let us see what tokenization is all about. Tokenization is basically a process of replacing the actual card details or the account details of the consumer with a unique alphanumeric token number, which can be used by the customers for carrying out transactions. So basically, this unique alphanumeric token number will act as a card at the point of sale, at the website or at the app which the customer is using. To simply put, instead of using your card details, a person can use this token to carry out transactions at any point of sale, which can be a website, an application or any other kind of service provider. And this the customer can do without exposing his or her actual account details, thereby providing greater amount of security to the customer during online transactions. Now let us see how tokenization works. This diagram is a graphical representation of how the Visa token services work, but this will provide you with a general idea of how any tokenization would work. So let's imagine that you here are the customer and this is your RuPay card, Visa card, MasterCard or any kind of debit or credit card. Now you sign in into Amazon to purchase a book. For example, you want to purchase Lakshmikant. So you go on to Amazon, go click on the book of Lakshmikant and put it in your cart. Now when the time of the payment comes, usually you would put in your card details and then enter your CVV, you will get an OTP and then you will make the payment. Now under tokenization, you will enter all your account details with Amazon or any other digital service platform. Now this digital service platform will send a request to your payment card operator, in this case which is the VisaNet. Now this VisaNet or the card payment provider would further share this request with the account issuer, which is nothing but the consumer's bank. Now the consumer's bank, that is your bank, will send a unique alphanumeric code to this card payment provider as well as to the consumer, that is you. Now when this token has been received by the card payment provider, this card payment provider will replace your account details with this unique alphanumeric code. And then this unique alphanumeric code or the token will be sent to Amazon for the payment of the transaction. Further, now next time when you go on Amazon and if you are using the same card, you do not need to put any kind of details. you can again use the same token which was provided to you earlier. In fact, these tokens which are generated are very unique for every token requester or a card holder. That is to say, for every account and for every card holder, there will be only one unique token which will be provided. Now, please don't get confused if you're not understanding this process. All you need to remember is that instead of you putting your actual account details or your card details, in the process of tokenization, you will be using a unique alphanumeric code which will replace your actual account details and will help you with a smooth, easy and quick transactions, especially with an online service provider. Now, as far as the significance of tokenization is concerned, the foremost thing which tokenization will do is that it will increase the safety of digital transactions in our country. Tokenization will help avoid the misuse of card details or network hacking and therefore will add an additional layer of security, especially when we are conducting transactions via debit or credit cards. Hence, tokenization will ensure safety of the digital transaction and reduce the chances of fraud or data theft. Secondly, tokenization is likely to increase digitization in our country because now, due to safety and security, more and more people will opt for digital payment. Lastly, tokenization is a part of a global best practice which are followed by various countries throughout the world. And if India also starts tokenization, then India too will have compliance to a lot of guidelines on data security and standards. Further, tokens are much more safer than the magnetic strips on the ATM cards because tokens do not carry the consumer's primary account details or the numbers. Based on our discussion, here is a prelims practice question. Please pause the video and solve it. We will discuss the answer after 5 seconds. The question is in relation to tokenization. The first statement, it involves replacement of the customer's account number with a unique token which can then be used for transactions is absolutely correct. Second, the token contains information related to bank's account number and hence it increases the risk of cyber theft. This is wrong. In fact, tokenization reduces the risk of cyber theft because the token number replaces the actual account details of a customer. Therefore, the right answer is A, one only. With this, let's move on to our next article. This article is an editorial taken from page number 8 and talks about the requirement of India and China to work together for the better development of Afghanistan post the withdrawal of United States from Afghanistan. Recently, there has been a likelihood of United States of America to withdraw its troops from Afghanistan, ushering in a responsibility on the regional powers in the Central Asia region to ensure stability in Afghanistan. Therefore, the author raises two prominent questions. Firstly, is that can China help Afghanistan to maintain its stability? That is, can China emerge as a power broker in Afghanistan? And secondly, can India and China work together to bring stability and development in Afghanistan? Next, the author is providing various instances of China's involvement in Afghanistan and is also giving us reasons why stability in Afghanistan is of paramount importance to China. The first reason is that China borders Afghanistan. As you can see on the map here is the country of China and China shares a northwest border with Afghanistan right here. Therefore, very logically, China has a great interest in the stability of Afghanistan. Secondly, according to the author, the post-USA stabilization of Afghanistan is very critical to China because if Afghanistan becomes unstable, then the war and chaos in Afghanistan could spill over into the northwestern territory of China, Pakistan, as well as the other Central Asian countries. Therefore, to avoid chaos and confusion in its own territory, it is imperative for China that it looks out that Afghanistan remains stable even after the USA withdraws from its territories. Third reason given by the author is the development of the Belt and the Road Initiative. The Belt and the Road Initiative of China passes through Pakistan and other Central Asian countries, and since Afghanistan shares its borders with Pakistan and these Central Asian countries, the situation in Afghanistan will have a deep impact on the greater Central Asian region and Pakistan, which are required to remain stable if at all BRI initiative has to become successful. Next, the author says that China is already involved in the stability of Afghanistan because China is a part of a lot of multilateral groupings. China has in the past announced that it wants to build regional consensus on Afghanistan and had therefore joined US and Russia in several peace talks with the Taliban. Apart from this, China is also part of the four-nation Quadrilateral Coordination Group, which has been formed to reach to a consensus on Afghanistan's situation. The other countries part of this quadrilateral coordination are Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the USA. Lastly, China has made heavy investments in Afghanistan, wherein it has invested in projects related to road, railways, mining, healthcare, etc., and also provides Afghanistan with military aid. Hence, keeping all these points in mind, the author sets out a good case for China to be actively involved in Afghanistan and to further proactively help Afghanistan to achieve regional stability. Next, the author is giving us instances and the reasons why India and China can cooperate together in Afghanistan. Firstly, India supports China's role in international negotiations related to Afghanistan, such as through the SCO or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Additionally, both India and China support full-time membership for Afghanistan in this SCO, under which currently Afghanistan is only an observer state. Secondly, according to the author, Afghanistan and India both intend to stop the cross-border terrorism which is plaguing Central Asia. Thus, the author feels both India and Afghanistan can ask China to pressurize Pakistan into controlling and abating this cross-border terrorism. Thirdly, the author feels that for both India and China, there is no security concern as far as working together in Afghanistan is concerned. The reason for this is that both India and China have no intention of keeping any kind of military troops in Afghanistan. Therefore, any presence of Indian soldiers in Afghanistan or vice versa will not lead to a security concern for China or for India. Fourthly, the author says even the Afghanistan government is very supportive of both India and China's cooperation in Afghanistan. A recent example of this would be that both India and China have started a joint training for the Afghan diplomats. Lastly, in the Wuhan summit, it was decided that both India and China together will make joint investment for various development projects all across the world. And therefore, under this Wuhan spirit, both the countries of India and China have decided that they will perform joint economic projects in Afghanistan. Therefore, looking at these points, the author is very optimistic that India and China can cooperate to bring stability as well as development into Afghanistan once the USA withdraws its troops from the territory of Afghanistan. With this, we come to an end for the discussion of this article. Let's move on to our next news. The next news appears on page number 13 and is talking about the recent changes the Reserve Bank of India has made in the gold monetization scheme. The Reserve Bank of India has made amendments to the gold monetization scheme by now allowing the charitable institutions as well as the government entities to deposit gold under the scheme. Earlier, under the gold monetization scheme, individuals, corporate entities, mutual funds, and exchange traded funds, etc., were only allowed to deposit gold under the scheme. But now the RBI has even allowed charitable institutions and the government entities to deposit gold under the gold monetization scheme. So let us understand what exactly is this gold monetization scheme. Now, to understand the gold monetization scheme, you first need to remember a few things. Firstly, though India has almost 20,000 tons of gold stock in our country, yet India imports almost 900 tons of gold every year. The reason for this is that most of this gold stock in India is lying idle and is neither traded nor monetized. Therefore, the basic idea behind the gold monetization scheme is to mobilize this idle gold which has been lying with the people and the institution and put this gold to productive use. Like stated, almost 20,000 tons of gold stock is lying idle either with the households or the institutions who neither trade this gold nor monetize it. Now, under the gold monetization scheme, what would happen that this idle gold which is held with the households, these common people under the gold monetization scheme will deposit their gold with the banks in a form of a fixed deposit. For example, a household can deposit 100 grams of necklace at 1% interest rate for 1 year with the bank. This deposit of gold with the bank is just like any other fixed deposit with the bank. Now, when the bank gets this gold, the bank can melt this gold into a gold bar and then can give it to the jewelers who can use this gold to produce jewelry and hence do not have to import extra gold from the outside. So the first benefit is that the idle gold which is being lying with the household and the institutions can be used by the banks and further by the jewelers who can use this gold to convert into jewelry and thereby reducing the reliance on import. The household which had deposited its gold upon maturity will be given an option either to get the gold back or to get the payment back in cash. So if the household opts that it wants to get the gold back, then it will get 101 grams of gold after 1 year because the rate of interest was 1%. And if at all they are demanding the cash, then they would get the cash amount for the present prevalent rate of the gold. Hence, this is the basic idea behind how the gold monetization scheme works. And the biggest benefit of this scheme is that it helps to mobilize the idle gold which has been lying with the household and the institutions, which can further lead to India reducing its reliance on the imported gold. The next news is the lead editorial taken from page number 8, in which the author is talking about judicial evasion and how the Supreme Court must ensure that the judgment passed by it are timely and are also clear and without ambiguities. The author in this article is highlighting the concept of judicial evasion, whereby the Supreme Court delivers a judgment which is firstly not on time, that is, the Supreme Court gives a very delayed judgment, and secondly, the judgment which has been provided is also not clear and is full of ambiguity. Further, the author also says that under judicial evasion, the Supreme Court avoids deciding a sensitive and a very important case, and this non-decision by the Supreme Court effectively favors the government as the lack of action on the part of the Supreme Court maintains a status quo. To prove his point, the author is giving us the example of the CBI case. As per the author, the question before the Supreme Court was a very simple legal question. That is, whether the CVC and the central government has the power to divest the CBI director. According to the author, this question required the court to interpret only 3 legal instruments to come to a reasonable conclusion, and yet it took the court almost 6 hearings and 2.5 months to come to any conclusion. Therefore, here the author says that this delay in judgment has acted in the favor of the government because for 2.5 months the status quo was maintained. Secondly, the author further goes on to say, though the Supreme Court has now reinstated the CBI director Alok Verma, but has given him no power to take any major policy decision. Now again, here the author is questioning what would constitute a major policy decision. On this question, the Supreme Court has remained silent. Therefore, according to the author, the CBI case presents an excellent example of judicial evasion, where firstly, not only the judgment was delivered on time, and secondly, when it was delivered, it had major ambiguities and lack of clarity. Another example cited by the author is the Aadhaar case. The author highlights that although private parties were banned from accessing the Aadhaar data, yet the decision of the Supreme Court led to different interpretations of this judgment. Therefore, to remove this ambiguity which had remained from this judgment, the legislature had to bring in a bill to amend the Aadhaar Act for the voluntary use of Aadhaar, especially in relation to bank accounts and SIM cards for the mobile phones. Thus, in conclusion, the author says that all those cases which are time sensitive, that is, where time is of essence, in such cases, the Supreme Court should be proactive and also be cautious that it delivers a timely judgment. And further, the judgment too, which is delivered by the Supreme Court, should not be ambiguous and not open to various kind of interpretations. With this, let's move on to our next article. The next news has been taken from page number 18 and is talking about a biosafe way to fight mosquitoes by controlling the mosquito birth. Now, as per the news, the scientists in the United States of America have discovered a drug which can help in mosquito birth control. Now, as per the researchers, there is a protein which is only found in female mosquitoes, which is very important or critical for the mosquitoes to give birth to young ones. That is, this protein is very important for the young mosquitoes to actually hatch. The reason why this protein is very important for the female mosquitoes is because in the absence of these proteins, the females will lay eggs which will have defective shells, And these defective shells will then cause the embryo to die inside the shell itself and not to hatch into a young one. So as per the news, the drug which has been discovered by the scientists in United Nations of America will actually block this protein, which is very critical for the female mosquitoes to give birth to young ones. These drugs can be used in the form of sprays, which will then be absorbed by the female mosquitoes through her legs and bodies, making it one of the most effective ways of mosquito birth control. Therefore, with this discovery, the scientists are very optimistic that they can develop a new biosafe insecticide which will help to fight mosquito population. The drug is of critical importance because mosquitoes are one of the world's deadliest insects according to the World Health Organization. One of the most prominent diseases caused by mosquitoes is malaria, which again is on the global rise in the recent years. In addition to malaria, mosquito bites also cause Zika, chikungunya, and yellow fever. Therefore, if we are able to discover a method with which we can control the population of the mosquitoes, then effectively we can also help abate the incidence of these mosquito-caused diseases. Based on a discussion, here is a prelims practice question. Please try and solve this question and we'll discuss the answer after 5 seconds. The question is asking which of the following diseases are caused by a mosquito bite. The first, Zika, is correct. Second, dengue is also right. Third, chikungunya is also correct. And the fourth, Japanese encephalitis, is also right. Therefore, the right answer to this question is D, 1, 2, 3 and 4. With this, we come to an end for today's discussion. Let's move on to the question for the day.